They say trouble doesn't knock first. It just shows up. For me, it arrived with a roar across the north field. Riding on the back of a yellow Cat 320 excavator at exactly 7:40 a.m., I was halfway through my second cup of coffee. The kind of quiet morning where the mist still drapes over the pines, and the air hangs heavy with that hesitant calm before the world decides to start moving. Then came the sound, steel teeth and diesel breath tearing through the stillness, shredding peace like claws through canvas. I live on the far edge of Willow County, Colorado, 14 acres passed down from my grandfather before his mind slipped into the fog. Officially surveyed in 1964, it's a patch of land framed by stubborn pines, dry weeds, and the kind of silence you can't fake or buy. I rebuilt the house myself, piece by piece. There's an old aluminum hangar I use for equipment and a wide, wild north field I've left untamed. Half sanctuary, half barrier from the rest of the world. It's not much, but it's mine, every inch steeped in roots, memory, and sweat. By the time I rolled up to the north fence in my pickup, the crew was already deep into what used to be wild grass and bird nests. The excavator's bucket was chewing up the soil like it was owed a debt. The operator looked up briefly. Blank face, mirrored glasses. Just another man doing a job. A couple more guys were pacing the field with tape measures and orange spray paint, drawing out shapes that could only mean one thing: development. I parked hard, got out, and walked straight into their mess. "Kill the engine," I called. The operator hesitated, then shut it down with a hiss of air and metal. He gave me a look that said, "Not my problem." Fair enough. The foreman, clipboard in hand, reflective vest stamped with the Willow Pines HOA logo, came toward me like he owned the dirt beneath his boots. "You can't be here during active site prep," he said, calm and bureaucratic, like I was the trespasser. "This is my property," I said evenly, pointing toward a rusted corner post half swallowed by grass, the same one that's marked the boundary since before these subdivisions started choking the valley. "You're standing on private land." He didn't even flinch. Instead, he flipped a page on his clipboard and held it out. "We have a service contract with Willow Pines HOA. This area's been approved for community expansion." I couldn't help but laugh, low, dry, and bitter. "That's funny," I said, "because last time I checked, this land was reserved for deer, hawks, and peace." He smiled, that dead, tight smile of a man who hides behind paperwork. I told him, plain as day, to move his machines off my land before I called the sheriff. He didn't move. So I made the call. 2 deputies showed up about 20 minutes later, both young, both polite. One looked like he still played high school football on weekends. They walked the fence line with me, studied the contract the crew had, and frowned in that "we know this is wrong but can't do anything" way. "Mr. Drake," one said, "this looks like a civil boundary dispute. Nobody broke in, nobody's armed. It's not criminal trespass. So they can just show up, dig holes on my property, and that's legal?" I asked. "We're not saying it's right," he replied, "but it's not criminal. You'll need to take it up in court." I stared at them, jaw tight. "You just watched illegal entry with heavy machinery. They offered to file a report. Nothing more. No arrests, no orders, just a polite good luck. By noon, I'd forced them off the land by standing my ground, literally, until the foreman gave in. But they left behind their scars, deep ruts carved into the soil, ugly and raw like wounds that wouldn't heal. That afternoon, I sat down and drafted a cease and desist. I cited property law, state boundary codes, and attached a copy of my deed. I printed it, signed it, and posted it on 3 laminated private property. No access, no HOA jurisdiction signs I'd staked 4 feet into the ground along the north line. Then, for good measure, I tacked another copy to the Willow Pines HOA bulletin board. The phone rang twice that night. Once from a blocked number, I let it ring. The second was from someone named Cheryl. Her voice was sugar-coated and sharp. She said I was being unneighborly. I told her I wasn't her neighbor. I hung up and went outside. The mist had rolled back in, soft over the ruts in the field, the scent of diesel still lingering. I stood there a long time, listening, waiting, because I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I thanked her for her concern, then told her to mind her footing near the fence. A few of those stakes weren't exactly smooth. What got under my skin wasn't just the nerve, it was the entitlement. That blind assumption that if a piece of land looks quiet or unworked, it's open season. That if the grass grows too tall, it's free for committees to pave over. That somewhere behind folding tables and coffee thermoses, people with clipboards and gavels could casually redraw lines that men like my grandfather bled to keep. These HOA folks don't knock on doors and they print glossy maps, hold closed meetings, and move in like fog over low ground. When they want what you've got, they don't ask. They just take. Well, I'm not built to be taken from. Not by bulldozers, not by men with measuring tape, and certainly not by a council that votes behind glass walls. I figured the confrontation, the cease and desist, and the shiny laminated signs would drive the point home. I figured wrong. 3 days later, I stepped out onto the porch to find a poster zip-tied to my gate. Hand-painted, cheerful colors, blue and yellow, with the words "Live in a community, be part of it." Underneath, in red marker, were about 30 signatures. Most names were strangers. The rest belonged to those same drive-by smilers who waved from SUVs but couldn't pick me out of a lineup. By afternoon, a gathering had formed near my northern line. Lawn chairs, kids with juice boxes, and someone passing cookies around like it was a church picnic. Except they were camped out right in front of my fence. Then came the megaphone. Yes, an actual megaphone, held by a woman dressed in a salmon pantsuit and mirrored aviators, reading from something she called a community resolution. That was my formal introduction to Karen Huntley. I'd seen her around before, grocery store, town meeting maybe, but now she stood there like a general at a podium, the self-appointed voice of Willow Pines. "Mr. Drake," she called through the megaphone, "this land represents unity for our neighborhood. We're giving you a chance to be part of something greater than yourself." I lifted my thermos in a mock salute. "Already did my part," I called back. "Kept a bulldozer from flattening a deer nest." Her smile didn't falter, but it shifted, the kind of grin you give right before putting down a family pet. That night, my property signs vanished. Not knocked over, not blown away, removed cleanly. Someone had cut the zip ties and walked off with them. I replaced every single one using steel bolts and a post hole digger deep enough to make a point. By morning, the message came back louder. I woke to the stench of chemicals and paint. Across the eastern fence, in red enamel letters, someone had scrawled, "Hermit. Get out or grow up." I spent an hour scrubbing, another hour installing motion lights, filed another report with the sheriff. The answer was the same: no cameras, no suspects, no action. Then came the cars. Different ones each day, parked crooked near the boundary. Not official, not discreet either. One man in a windbreaker walked the line with a tablet, stopping every few feet to type something. "Neighborhood survey," he said when I confronted him. I told him I had a survey of my own if he wanted to see it. He left fast. 2 days later, every mailbox on the road, except mine, had a glossy pamphlet titled, "Together We Grow." The front page showed a computer mock-up of a playground, picnic tables, and a shiny new gazebo, superimposed directly over my northern field. At the bottom, in small print, proposed site pending alignment. Alignment. Like my property was just waiting to fall into place with their plans. That night, I made a call to an old Army buddy, a security specialist now. Within 48 hours, we had a network of infrared trail cameras installed around the perimeter. Motion-triggered, cloud uploading, invisible from the road. If anyone came back, they'd leave a face print behind. Sunday morning brought the next escalation. A neatly folded letter on HOA stationery, signed by none other than Huntley herself. It accused me of violating the spirit of neighborhood. Cooperation. It claimed my refusal to participate was damaging communal harmony and forcing the HOA to review boundary. Inconsistencies. That last phrase landed like a gut punch. They weren't just pestering me anymore. They were laying legal groundwork. I spent the evening spreading documents across my kitchen table. Deed copies, aerial photos, original survey notes, and my grandfather's notarized land transfer from 1978. It looked like a war map. I realized this wasn't about compromise. It was about conquest. They wanted to box me in, make me out as some backwoods crank clutching his acres like Gollum and his ring. I could feel the storm building, quiet, deliberate, and close. And in the middle of it, smiling like she'd already won, was Karen Huntley. It didn't take long for the next move. A week later, a thick white envelope landed in my mailbox. Official correspondence. That kind of paper that smells like toner and arrogance. I opened it on the porch, coffee in one hand, crowbar in the other, tightening a fence post that someone had tried to pry open overnight. Inside was a lawsuit. The HOA of Willow Pines, in full legal flair, was suing me for obstruction of community development, malicious interference, and my personal favorite, violation of cooperative spirit. That one sounded like it came straight out of a corporate self-help retreat. But the real dagger was at the end. The boundary between the Drake property and Willow Pines estates remains legally ambiguous and requires judicial clarification. Translation: they wanted to move the line. I didn't waste a minute. I called a law firm I'd worked with years back during another inheritance dispute. They referred me to a man named Brett Sutton, an HOA specialist with a reputation for being both sharp and pragmatic. When we met, Sutton looked every bit the part. Polished, mid-50s, Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a distress signal. But he listened. He nodded at the right times. Classic overreach, he said. They're testing you through legal ambiguity. We'll push back hard. He filed motions fast. Motion to dismiss, demand for discovery, injunction challenge, and told me to stay calm. Don't engage, he said. Let the court handle it. I wanted to trust him. For a while I did. But his focus always slid sideways when I brought up the excavation damage or the camera footage. Once I showed him a clip of HOA members holding a prayer circle on my field. He laughed. That plays well for them. Don't look hostile to community values. Community values don't involve trespassing, I said. He just smiled. Let's not provoke. Then came the gut punch, a temporary injunction. The court barred me from interfering with approved community enhancement efforts, meaning I couldn't stop construction. Sutton brushed it off. Procedural, he said. Judges lean conservative on property development. It'll lift soon. Days later, the machines were back. I watched from my porch as backhoes carved through the northern field again, laying concrete markers, planting a future site of Willow Pines Pavilion sign like a flag on the moon. It felt like watching someone bury history, one shovel of dirt at a time. I started to dig my own holes, not with a shovel, but with a late-night search and a bottle of scotch and a nagging feeling. I pulled up the HOA's public filings, combed through board minutes and archived PDFs until my eyes smarted. That's when I saw it, Brett Sutton's name. Not once, not twice. 3 times. Listed as legal counsel on strategies for acquiring land. Dates stamped months before he'd ever shown up to represent me. For a moment, I almost laughed at the coincidence. Then I almost didn't. The next morning, I marched into his office, slammed the printed screenshots onto his desk, and demanded an explanation. He didn't glare, didn't sputter. He leaned back, steepled his hands, and wore that smile that feels like a blade hidden in silk. Technically, he said, cool as a courtroom fan, I'm not currently retained by them. Small town, people talk. Karen and I know each other. He couched it in casual familiarity, like that made betrayal any less sharp. I reminded him he'd been hired to defend me. He raised an eyebrow, asked if I still had representation, and offered nothing more. I left with my stomach cold. By noon, I'd fired him and had filed a formal complaint with the state bar. By 2, an Army friend had put me in touch with Danielle Rowe, a litigator who didn't bother with charm because she didn't need it. Danielle didn't crack jokes, didn't blink when I laid out what I'd found. She called it what it was, classic sabotage. Sutton had delayed filings, stonewalled counterclaims, and steered me into procedural traps. He'd been building a road to my defeat and paving it in corporate courtesy. She looked me straight in the eyes. They're not just after your acreage, she said. They want to make an example of you. That made me straighten in my chair. Then let's make one out of them, I said. If the Army taught me anything, it's how to respond when you're surrounded. Sutton had put me in a Brooks Brothers coffin. Karen and her minions had started pouring concrete on my field like it was a church fundraiser. The courts teetered, the HOA filed again, and I decided I wasn't playing defense from the back foot anymore. First stop, the state cadastral records. The office smelled like damp paper and old coffee, the kind of bureaucratic mausoleum where records live in string-tied folders and stamps mean everything. Tucked in a beige folder was the proof I'd hoped for. A certified 1964 boundary map, county assessor seal crisp across the corner, showing without ambiguity that my northern field belonged to my parcel. Not adjacent, not disputed, mine. I felt the room tilt a fraction in my favor. Next, I hired a private surveyor with no ties to the HOA, someone whose work wouldn't be swayed by small-town friendships. Leslie Grant fit the bill. Mid-40s, boots that had seen more trails than sidewalks, a Tacoma that always looked like it had a story to tell. She ran a full 3D survey, drone flyovers, satellite overlays, differential GPS checks, and a boundary validation tied back to state records. Her report locked with my grandfather's deed like two halves of a shot glass. "This is rock solid," she told me. "You've got historical continuity, official surveys, and current GIS confirmation. Anyone claiming ambiguity is blowing smoke." I wanted to exhale for the first time in weeks. Then Leslie sent me a terse text late one night. "You didn't tell me who I was dealing with. Call tomorrow. Something's up." Over greasy diner coffee the next morning, she slid a digital recorder across the table like she was handing me a live grenade. "Karen came by," she said flatly. She was polite. Then she made it clear that if I contradicted their story, I might lose county contracts. Leslie had friends on the inside, she said, but people get pressured. The recording captured Huntley's syrupy tone, turning thin and threatening. "You can help your community, Leslie, or you can help a man working against it. Consider your future." Leslie pressed stop and shrugged. "I don't play that game." She handed me the file. I put it on my evidence drive and bolted it into a fire safe I'd welded to the hangar floor. I trusted that safe more than any courthouse. A few days later, while I was fitting motion lights, a woman introduced herself at the gate. Jeans, scuffed boots, a press badge, a DSLR slung over her shoulder. Gina Morelli from the Colorado Sentinel. She'd been tracking Willow Pines for months and smelled rot a mile off. I showed her the lawsuit, the doctored map, trail cam clips, and the audio of Karen leaning on a licensed surveyor. Gina listened like a prosecutor gathering motive. "This isn't just a boundary fight," she said. "It's a land grab dressed up like civic virtue." "Can I quote you?" I asked. "Only if they sue me too," she said with a wry grin, then slipped me her card. "Call me first if you get anything else." That night, a burner email pinged in. Subject line, "You didn't hear this from me." Attachments, internal board minutes, budget spreadsheets, emails between Sutton and Huntley dated months prior. One line from Karen landed like ice. "With Brett handling him, it should be a clean process. He won't know until it's over." The whistleblower asked to remain unnamed. I promised secrecy and added the files to my folder. Suddenly, I had it all. Archival deeds, drone footage, a crooked lawyer, a threatened surveyor, a sympathetic reporter, and a mole inside the HOA. I wasn't defending a patch of dirt anymore. I was building a case to take everything they'd built and set it on fire in court. Courtrooms are antiseptic and unnerving, but I showed up in a pressed shirt and a leather folder packed with proof. Danielle was already there, composed, relentless, the kind of lawyer who sharpens arguments until they cut. "You brought the flash drive?" she asked without looking up. I handed it over. Trail cam clips, Leslie's mapping, county deeds, the email dump, and the audio of Huntley's veiled threats. Across the room, the HOA's lawyers sat in matching Navy suits like a chess set. At the center, Karen Huntley looked out of place in what might as well have been evening wear, smiling like a woman attending a gala instead of defending allegations of land theft. She nodded at me once. I didn't return it. They always say justice moves slow, but when it finally comes, it lands like thunder. The courtroom smelled faintly of stale paper and nervous sweat when Judge Margaret Deal took her seat. Silver hair tied back, glasses low on her nose, voice sharp enough to shave with. She asked both sides to begin. Karen's legal team stood first, polished, practiced, dripping with self-righteous charm. They spoke of progress, community engagement, and collective harmony. They painted me as a stubborn recluse, clinging to forgotten land like some old mountain hermit refusing to join civilization. Then they pulled their stunt, introducing a so-called archival survey that conveniently showed the northern parcel falling within HOA control. It looked shiny, official, and fake as a $3 bill. Danielle stood with deliberate calm, smoothing her blazer as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "that document isn't genuine, and I can prove it." She handed the clerk a folder thick enough to break a wrist. Inside were the originals, the 1964 assessor's seal, my grandfather's deed, and Leslie Grant's authenticated 3D survey overlay. Then, without missing a beat, Danielle pressed play on an audio file. Karen's honeyed voice filled the courtroom. "You have a chance to help your community, Leslie. Or you can help a man who's working against it. Think about what that means for your future." The words echoed against the marble like a confession. For the first time since this nightmare began, Karen's mask cracked. The smirk slipped, and the tension in her jaw spoke louder than any apology could. Danielle didn't stop there. She called the sealed witness by affidavit. Our whistleblower, Riley Hers. The clerk read his statement aloud for the record. "I was directed to scrub digital files from the HOA server concerning land strategy. I preserved internal emails showing collusion between board members and attorney Brett Sutton, who simultaneously represented Mr. Drake. Sutton intentionally delayed filings to advantage the HOA," the courtroom murmured. Judge Deal peered over her glasses. "Are we talking about the same Brett Sutton who once served as defense counsel?" Danielle's answer was firm. "Yes, Your Honor, and we are submitting a formal motion for sanctions and referral to the bar." Then came Leslie. Calm as a sniper, she outlined her survey process, drone scans, GPS calibration, historic overlays, all proving the land was unequivocally mine. "There's no gray zone here," she said clearly. "Never was." Then Danielle queued up the trail cam footage. On the screen, under night vision glare, HOA volunteers crept through my north field, pulling down private property signs and hammering in shiny new ones marked Future Pavilion Site. One face was unmistakable, Karen herself, hammer in hand. By the time the video ended, the room was ice cold. The HOA's counsel muttered objections, but they had no footing left. Their narrative of good faith was burning in front of everyone. "This was an error in communication," they said weakly. "An administrative misunderstanding." Judge Deal's patience thinned to paper. "What I see," she said sharply, "is deliberate manipulation, false records, and a clear abuse of authority." Karen's jaw twitched. Danielle leaned back, satisfied but silent. When the gavel fell for recess, the tide had already turned. We'd come in accused. We were leaving as the ones who'd exposed the rot. 2 weeks later, same courtroom. The air hung thick with expectation. The judge read her ruling without flourish, each word like a clean strike of steel. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Mr. Trevor Drake." My pulse hit my throat. "The parcel in question remains under full legal and historical ownership of Mr. Drake. Willow Pines HOA is ordered to cease all activity on or near his land, to remove unauthorized structures, and to publicly retract all prior claims." Karen sat frozen, knuckles white, eyes fixed forward. But the judge wasn't done. Additionally, the court finds compelling evidence of fraudulent conduct. The HOA knowingly submitted altered documentation. Former counsel Brett Sutton acted with willful deception, obstructing his client's defense. Therefore, she paused, glancing at both parties, Ms. Huntley is referred to the district attorney's office on charges of document forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and malicious trespass. Mr. Sutton is referred to the state bar and criminal court for ethics. Violations and fraud, the gasp that rippled through the gallery might have included my own. Then came the final blow. Damages, $1.2 million. Legal costs, land restoration. Reputational and emotional harm. I didn't care about the money. What mattered was that the truth had finally found daylight. I looked at Danielle. She didn't grin or pump her fist. She just gave a single quiet nod. the nod of a soldier after a clean victory. Outside, the afternoon sun felt different, heavier but cleaner somehow. A few neighbors had gathered watching the reporters swarm. One man I recognized, a guy who used to cross the street when he saw me coming, stepped forward awkwardly. "Didn't think you'd pull it off," he said. "Glad you did." I just nodded. Words felt cheap. That evening from my porch, I watched the last of the HOA's future pavilion signs being yanked out by a city crew. The land looked raw, torn up, wounded, but free again. The sun dipped behind the pines, casting long shadows over the field my grandfather once walked. For the first time in months, the silence didn't sound like loss. It sounded like home, earned, defended, and finally mine again. The concrete slab they'd laid months ago was already spiderwebbing beneath the first bite of autumn frost. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching steam rise into the cool air, the wind cutting through the pines with that familiar low hum I hadn't heard since before the chaos began. The land was mine again. Every inch, every fence post, every stubborn patch of grass. But I wasn't the same man who'd once thought peace was something you could inherit. The first thing I did after the ruling wasn't throw a party or pop a bottle. I went shopping for armor, not just any gate. A full steel-framed, motorized, solar-powered barricade with motion sensors and a reinforced lock system. The kind of thing that could stop a bear, or better yet, a convoy of smug HOA officials in their matching golf carts. I had it anchored right where they'd tried to build their fake park entrance. The crew who installed it didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. I just paid cash and tipped heavy. Then I called in a favor from a local tree nursery. 12 Rocky Mountain junipers, tall as flagpoles and thick with green, went into the ground along my northern border, 2 even lines like sentries standing guard. Maybe it was symbolic, maybe just stubbornness, but I wanted roots deeper than any paperwork they could forge. A week later, on a crisp Saturday morning, I saw her, Karen Huntley. No pastel suit, no clipboard, no crowd of followers. Just a gray hoodie, dark glasses, and silence. She stood across the road staring at the new sign welded to my gate. Private property, no access, trespassers will be prosecuted. Owner, T. Drake. She didn't linger. Maybe 30 seconds. Then she turned, climbed into a dented sedan with a missing hubcap, and disappeared down the road. That was the last time anyone saw her in Willow Pines. Brett Sutton didn't vanish so quietly. His face hit the local news a week later. Headline read, "Attorney disbarred in HOA fraud scandal." He tried to salvage his reputation with a radio interview, something about procedural confusion and ethical misinterpretations. No one bought it. His career was toast, crisp and smoking. Then came the message I didn't expect. Riley Hearst, the mole who'd risked his job to leak the truth, reached out again. He'd quit the HOA and joined a startup focusing on geographic transparency, a kind of open-source watchdog group for land disputes. "Figure if I'm going to stare at boundary maps all day," he said, "I might as well use them for good." Turns out Leslie Grant had joined him. The two of them launching something called the Open Acre Project. Their goal, to expose shady land deals across the state. Nerd heroes, I called them. And then there was Gina Morelli. 3 days after the ruling, her front-page story hit the stands. The man who said no and meant it. The piece went viral faster than wildfire in a dry canyon. A week later, she dropped a short documentary titled Lines in the Dirt. It showed drone footage of my property, interviews, legal records, and a clip of me standing beside that new gate, looking like I'd been through war because, in a way I had, the aftermath was strange. I started getting letters, not emails, real letters, from across the country. Folks from Oregon, Georgia, even Maine, all telling me their own battles with neighborhood tyrants, their own stories of losing ground to greed disguised as community improvement. One man wrote that he was naming his dog after me. I told him fine, as long as the mutt bit lawyers and not mailmen. But the best moment came on a still Thursday morning. I was out checking the new motion sensors when I heard a small voice call out. A kid, maybe 8 years old, skinny, wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big, stood just beyond the fence line with a scuffed soccer ball. "Hey," he said, "You're the guy with the land, right?" "That's me," I said. He looked both ways like he wasn't supposed to be talking. "My dad says you stopped the bad people," I smiled faintly. "Something like that." He kicked the ball. It rolled under the fence toward me. He froze, wide-eyed. I picked it up and tossed it back over. "Don't worry," I said. "Just this once." He grinned and sprinted off, dust kicking up behind him. I stood there for a while after, listening to the wind move through the new junipers, the sound of quiet returning home. No engines, no shouting, no legal threats taped to my mailbox. Just the land, scarred, but breathing again. Mine. And this time, it wasn't just owned. It was earned.